Thank you so much for having us here this morning. I know that you've had a chance to experience some of the gems in the city looking at your agenda. Last night you were at the Harvey Gantt, which was really special. I'm glad that you were able to do that. So our current story, our current chapter of our story is unfolding here in Charlotte as well. And I am thrilled that we have the space today to tell some of our story and that you are interested to listen to it as well. I want to start off with a little known fact. 50%, more than 50% actually now, of the hotel rooms in the United States are owned by Indian Americans, immigrant Indian Americans. So we have a very special relationship with hotels. I had a front row seat seeing this story unfold beginning in the 1980s, not only in my own home, but in the home of my uncles, aunts, and friends. We lived on the property. We lived in little management suites where our hotels were also situated, and my uncles and my aunts did, my cousins did, my friends did. This was normal to me. It was normal to me that we had residents on the property. It was normal to me that our families were integrating business and life. This was important for them to do because they had really little margin for error. They had to be at the ready all of the time. To step in when front desk shifts had to be handled, when rooms had to be cleaned, maybe for the second or third time in the day so they could be rented multiple times in the day. As we got older, we stepped in, all hands on deck. Again, there was really little margin for error. Some of us were undocumented. Some of us had come with limited resources, and that amounted to one shot at success. Living on the property served a couple of purposes. It allowed us to outcompete the other hotels in the market, other hotels that were owned by other patrons, predominantly white patrons who were given preferential treatment in the economy. They were able to gain bank loans easier than we were able to. They were able to see and have better access to the better opportunities because of their relationships with the brokers in the community. Also, it allowed us to be thrifty because we did have limited resources. So we had to have every dollar stretch. And so if we lived on the property, we could roll our expenses into the business. When I met Jay in college, he became my closest friend. And he is now my life partner and business partner. He's over there in the back. When Jay and I began getting to know each other, and I learned that his parents also owned motels and hotels, and that his parents also lived in the United Kingdom. In fact, at the same time my parents did, just a few miles down the road from each other, but never saw each other. And that he and his brother and I were all born at the same hospital in the National Health System in the United Kingdom, the Royal Infirmary. None of that was a coincidence to me. None of it. See, by that time, I had already met hundreds or even thousands of people who had the same elements in their own life story. This was all a product of members of this community seeking well-being. It was through social capital that they ended up sharing information and ended up in the same towns in Africa, in the United Kingdom, and then eventually in the United States. And it was through sharing information and a remarkable amount of trust and wanting to see each other succeed that they are now a significant role in the American business landscape, in real estate of all business sectors. And this is so important because it's through the principles of well-being that this has happened, that even Warren Buffett's team doesn't want to touch the hotel industry. They don't want to compete with the Patels. Although well-being, survival, all of it comes at a trade-off. And so members of this community The generation prior to me, my uncles, my aunts, my parents, even the generation before them, our grandparents, they traded dignity for survival, for consistent access to essential needs like food, housing, being able to send their kids off for education. They assimilated and they had to subscribe to the sanitized business principles in America. They had to hide themselves in the hotels. They didn't cook their food on sellout weekends. They didn't wear their garments during traditional events in the parking lot and snuck out the back door with the fear of offending the customers. And so as second-generation hotel developers, we have the luxury of the survival well-being principle established. We now have a choice. We now have latitude. We can now build on the different domains of well-being and open ourselves up and pursue self-actualization. We can now reclaim this territory in the hotel space, and we can also redefine what it means to be profitable in the hotel space. It doesn't have to come at the cost of everything else. And that's what we're doing here in our next venture in Charlotte. Having gone to some of the top universities in the country and earning some of the top ranks in corporate America, we are able to look back at what our families have achieved. And we are able to look at what made them so successful and what could be improved, and match that all up in academic frameworks and business frameworks, and match up what was so successful about the way our parents ran their businesses but didn't have terminology for it, and matches up with what consumers are expecting and demanding. So profitability is still there, even though we want to be able to tell our story and we want to be able to deliver hospitality in the way that we know. We want to work in our culture, the ethos of our culture, which is community, which is being a collective society, into the business model itself, which can be profitable. And we know this because we've had the chance to attend universities. We've had the chance to work in corporate America. We've had the chance to run our own businesses. And so we can decolonize the practice of hospitality as has been defined by American business. We're going to do that a few different ways. The first way we did that is we put up a pilot in Charlotte. We took a percentage of our dollars and put up an experimental hotel. This doesn't happen in real estate. Developers would be too shy to take even 1% of the total development budget and do something like we have done in Charlotte. We think this is important to do because we're in a neighborhood. We're going to a neighborhood. And we don't want to just throw up a behemoth of a building with no conversation, no community co-design, or no integration into the existing fabric of the neighborhood. So some of these images that you see here are from the pilot hotel. And the pilot hotel was designed based on our own assumptions of what we think would fit in the neighborhood. But it was a chance for those assumptions to be checked with the neighborhood, something visible. Does this resonate with you? Is this a fair representation of the neighborhood? Would you like to see something like this be part of the neighborhood? What should we get rid of? What should we keep? Second, we started to do community immersions. We've done 2 rounds of community immersions where we've connected with people in the Charlotte community from the arts scene, from the food and beverage scene, the civic and activist scene, even the business scene. We have gone to these individuals and to their spaces just to listen, to see how they are experiencing Charlotte. What pain points are they experiencing? What gain points are they experiencing? What's working well for them in the landscape of hotels currently in Charlotte? And not even just hotels, just being a member and a resident in the Charlotte community. What's going on? What can we glean? And how can we then turn that into something that we can address as being part of the ecosystem in the community as a hotel? Next up, we're doing a series of community sprints. And in those sprints, what we will be doing is relinquishing decision-making as a developer into the neighborhood on a couple of key questions. Questions like, how should we program the public space in the hotel? Hotels typically have thousands of square footage in their public space that goes underutilized after breakfast. Also, nobody is going to the front desk to check out or check in anymore. That's being replaced by digital technology. However, hotels are still programmed with public space. That's the heart and the soul of the hotel. So how do we really bring the heart and the soul of the hotel to life? Well, in our mind, it's first designing around the needs of the community, the desires of the community. How can this gathering space be utilized for some of the things that the community may benefit from or add to the community, not take away or not even be neutral? And so that will be one of the questions that we explore with members of the community. And then finally, one of the things that we're also doing, as I mentioned, is building upon the domains of well-being. We are privileged because the generation before worked so hard on establishing survival. And it's not guaranteed. Anything could happen. We recently came out of the pandemic, and our community was severely scared of what was going to happen to our legacy in the hotel business. But we tapped back into the same principles and the same cultural norms of how we established our presence in the industry first to make it through the pandemic. Luckily, we've gotten through the other side with minimal scratches and bruises, and we're working through it, and we will get through it. And now we're ready to evolve, and we're ready to push the needle. So Jay, myself, and his brother are seeing creating our own brand as the new frontier, as the way that we think our generation can push the needle. And in that brand, we want to tell this story, this immigration story that has happened in the hotel space through the medium of the hotel itself. And so we want to demonstrate our mastery in hospitality, and we want to deliver our version of hospitality and uplift the principles of community and uplift the principles of a culture that thinks as a unit versus individualistically. And also, because it is a physical space, we want to introduce South Asian architecture and interior design. There is not one hotel that has that visual identity. Yet, as I mentioned at the top, that more than 50% of the hotel rooms in the United States are owned by Indian Americans. And we do not want that story to be invisible. We want to preserve that legacy. Why? Why do we take this approach? Nobody's asking us to do it. The city of Charlotte has not asked us to engage with the community. We have been approved for this project as is. It's because we have also been othered. We have never fit in squarely into one space. We have had few opportunities where spaces have been designed for us. So knowing all of this, why would we do it any other way? Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. We have some time for questions, comments. Nina. Wait, we've got a mic coming to you.
Thanks, Namisha, for sharing your story. My question is, why Charlotte, of all cities in the country?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. A few reasons, and Jay, chime in as well. One, I've spent most of my time in North Carolina, and it's our backyard. Charlotte is a growth city. So for us to take this approach, we do have to make sure that the financial sustainability and feasibility is in the background, but we don't need to lead with that. Once we can kind of clear that hurdle, we can make sure that, that the financial the economics are going to work for a property of the size and scale that we're building. And so it happens to be our backyard. It happens to be a growth city where the financials will be supportive of the approach that we want to take. And also, we believe now that as we've been doing the work, we have expanded to a Southeast regional strategy because we feel like there's more of a strategic white space in the marketplace for a product like this, a product that tells a story in the hotel sector, where we can stand out and not have to have so much competition around us. So it's partly because we're comfortable in this space, it's our backyard, and it's partly it makes good business sense for us as well.
I don't need a microphone. I don't care. You were going to somebody else?
Oh, no, we were coming to you. Well, I was coming to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. So just a couple questions. I'm trying to imagine. So about how many rooms, what neighborhood is it that it's in and that you're working with, and maybe why did you choose that one? And these pictures are really, really beautiful. These are part of, I'm assuming, of the space. And if there's any kind of captions you want to give to any of these, that would be good.
Yeah, sure. So the property, the full-scale property, so right now we have a pilot property, meaning we have 5 rooms that are available for anybody to rent and give us feedback on, test, experiment, et cetera, and it's informing our full-scale hotel. So we did not assemble any of our team until we were able to get the pilot fully operational for at least 1 year so we could collect data, and then also after doing the community immersions. And so now we have a team, and that team has taken us through the conceptual phase of designing the hotel, and that hotel will have anywhere from 130 to 140 rooms. It will have public space, food and beverage, outlets, probably 2 or 3, of which we will also be opening up the dialogue to the community in terms of how do we want to see this food and beverage program coming together, so that we're not just replicating or missing the mark on what the people living closest to the space could, enjoy there. And then this neighborhood, because in Charlotte, where we are right now, it is a commercial business district, and the way that development works, it's starting to look and feel like maybe other cities that you've been to. There's definitely the nuances that you can pick up on if you look closely. But the neighborhood that we're going to be in, Plaza Midwood, Belmont neighborhood, has a strong sense of place. It has a lot of historical context. It's gone through many evolutionary periods. It just has a really rich culture, and it's not about fitting in that neighborhood. It's about adding to the neighborhood. And so we felt like it was a good fit for us there.
Again, thank you for sharing your story. Quick question, what were some of the themes that emerged from your engagement with the community that you weren't expecting that was a little bit different from what you thought initially? Mm-hmm.
So one of the insights that we were able to come to, I wouldn't say I was surprised by it, but it was more of an affirmation and validation in a way through the words of the members of the community. Something that instinctively I was feeling was made more concrete through their own voice and words. And it was that communities are not against development. They're not. They're against not being enrolled in the process of development. And they're against their culture and their stories being erased as that development happens. And so it was about preserving that culture and the historical context that has taken root and taken place in those neighborhoods. That is really important. I was going to include some of the insights in here, and I wish I would have now since you answered them. Jay, do you remember any particular ones that stood out?
I think it was just
Hold on, we got a mic coming to you.
Thank you.
Hey, Jay!
Thanks, Melissa. That's Melissa with Odyssey Creative. Yes. I think the other big one that resonated with me or that really struck me was this undertone that became sort of an overtone when we really asked that, with all of this growth that's happening, it looks really positive, and there's a lot of economic activity that people can point to that is a sign of growth, these indicators that people point to. But there are all these things below the surface that are still, that people are wrestling with that haven't been addressed. And so this is great, but what about this group? What about that group? What about these other underlying issues? So I think this idea that development should not be kind of one track was really big, is a big theme for these folks because they're not the ones that are typically in the development conversation. If you go to the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, you go to the Economic Development Authority, there are the same kind of, sort of the similar types of mindsets that are there because they're in those circles, right, of in economic investment. There's certain frameworks for that. And so when you look at the grassroots activism community that's that's active here, the artist community, those folks aren't typically in those spaces. And so we heard this sort of contrasting theme that felt really important to include in the development work. And so that it wasn't all solved because we're getting all this economic investment, that there was still a lot of work to be done.
I see on your slideshow that you have the beds and you have bunk beds. Would there be any special floor or design for the disabled, the disability that cannot climb the bunk beds or cannot move throughout the suites? Or would there be a special floor, or you already have some rooms designated for the handicap or disabilities?
Yes. So we have special rooms that are designed for people with different needs to maneuver around the room effectively. But we have not heard the idea of having a special floor. That is a really interesting thought and idea. Hotels have always kind of made sure that there were rooms that were available for folks with different needs and disabilities. But one of the things that we experimented with in our pilot was not to put that room in a corner. Usually those rooms are relegated to the corner, and usually those rooms are kind of an afterthought, and the same furniture and fixtures and design involvement is not applied to those specific rooms. So what we did was we brought our room up as the second room, and we went full on in terms of putting our own cultural aesthetic in that room, and it's become one of the most popular rooms among white men.
There's a building code requirement that you have to have a certain percentage of facilities to accommodate all kinds of needs for mobility and hearing and different things like that. And so there is a bare minimum. And so you kind of look at most hotels and you've got hospital grade stuff. You've got these really ugly shower seats and a shower curtain that is not as pretty as the beautiful tile in the other bathroom. And so as to add to Namisha's point, while it is the most photographed room, it's because we put a lot of or we put the same care into that, where we thought, well, why should that room be any less beautiful? Like the shower seat, our architect and builder just picked out one that they would have put in any other hotel, and it was one of those you would see in a hospital. Gray, plastic, ugly. So we thought, no, that's not going to work. And so we just, a simple Google search, there are beautiful shower seats out there, and we found a beautiful teak shower seat that just was elegant, and it was a pleasure to use, whether you need it or not, and so we put that in there. So that was just one example of how we did that room.
Yeah.
Fantastic job. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I actually live in Charlotte and been in Charlotte for a very long time. And so my only concern and question about that is the Belmont resident community, they have been displaced a lot because that was a predominantly Black area. And it has been very much gentrified. So with you all being there, how are you ensuring that that is not driving up the cost and displacing more of our Belmont residents?
I'm glad you brought that up. I think Plaza Midwood, in that part of town, you all may not be familiar, but Plaza Midwood gets a lot of the sort of love in terms of the economic development and the sort of the consumer side of things, because that's where a lot of the spending is, and a lot of the discretionary or spending and like the gentrification is happening, but it's also happening in Belmont. And so the first thing that we did was that we just wanted to know where we were. And as we looked at the boundaries in the neighborhoods that we're very clear when we talk to folks in the community that we are in the Belmont neighborhood specifically. And so really that neighborhood comes first in terms of our priority of stakeholders. And we look at Plaza Midwood and all the surrounding neighborhoods in terms of the context of where we are. So we are very clear on where we are. And we've really just started to talk with those folks. So, the Belmont neighborhood associations, we've started to talk with some of the church elders and ask some folks in the city and in the community as we moved to town. That was our kind of other big thing that we wanted to do. Was we moved here a year ago to work on this project because we knew that understanding and becoming a part of the community was going to be important for us to actually know what the actual issues were and actually to be immersed in that. And so that's been the first thing, is having a series of conversations. And as we are looking at what we're going to be doing, they're going to have, we're going to really rely on those folks as we do our next round of community design sprints and conversations around what is going to be some of the key factors that they want to see take place in this space when regards to the public space, for example. What are things that have worked and not worked in terms of being displaced when it comes to a public place that is sort of semi-public because it's in a retail or a privately owned environment. And so what's the price point for the food and beverage? Who has access to the interior space? Do you have to be a guest to come into the space? Or can anybody walk into the space? What if your kids are walking to school nearby? Are they welcome into the lobby? Or, is it sort of an off-limit space? So those are the kinds of questions that we're grappling with, and we've noticed in our other hotels and other cities or other locations that are also rapidly gentrifying and displacing people, that those are the kinds of things that sort of affect the day-to-day life. And so we're really just trying to understand what those things might be, and how do we have that conversation, honestly, that yes, we are also somewhat part of this, process of gentrifying because we are also adding investment dollars, but how do we engage the folks that are there, that have been there for generations, so that we can sort of have an honest conversation on what we can do to mitigate that and bring folks along into the process so that our design is inclusive of that versus being done sort of in a vacuum to satisfy one particular stakeholder, which would be, in most cases, just the owners of the capital.
What were some of the uses of the public space that came out, or you're still not there in figuring that out?
No, we're not there yet. And so we haven't actually designed the spaces yet. So we don't want to say, well, this is what every hotel has, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to say, well, we have this much space to work with. What should it look like? Who should have access to it? What should be free? What should be commercial? And those are the questions that we're working with, because not everything has to be commercial. And so that's often what we found in our research drive out certain people. And so those are the things that we're grappling with, and we want to turn some of that decision making over to the community as we enroll them, so that if there are things that we need to design into it so that it is more inclusive, more accessible, that we can do that before we design it.
Questions around the recycling picture. Recycling picture. Can you all talk about that? It was like a bunch of plastics.
Yeah. So I know you also had the question about some of the imagery. The imagery is a combination of our pilot hotel and the community immersion that we did, and the people that we met with, and some mood boards for our full-scale hotel. And the picture of the plastic, that all of those items came from a NASCAR race, I believe. There's a place, as we were doing our community immersion, and we moved here, and we've been trying to get to know the neighborhood, in Belmont neighborhood, called the Innovation Barn here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the Innovation Barn is was inspired by an approach that is happening in the Netherlands. So the executive director of the Innovation Barn went out to the Netherlands to see how they manage for recycling in a city, how they have created a circular economy, how they have engaged people more with, understanding what's happening with the climate and what role they can play to minimize some of those impacts. And so replicated that sort of model from the Netherlands here in Charlotte, and it's in Belmont called the Innovation Barn. And so what they were going to do with all of that plastic, they can take plastic from companies, which are now going to be required to recycle and bring back into their supply chain some percentage of the materials that they use, so Pepsi and Coke and other companies. And the Innovation Barn then does that packaging for them and gives them back the resources to be able to meet that goal. And the Innovation Barn charges them for that.
Hi.
Yeah.
Two questions. The first is, as you all think about your role beyond the design and the development of the hotel in the community, say it's successful 3-5 years out, what do you see as your role in kind of the broader community development as you imagine other places may move in or want to set up commercial operations around the hotel? Curious kind of what y'all's vision for that is. And then if you have any other examples that you're drawing inspiration from, whether it be hospitality development or otherwise, of how folks have been able to bring the community in very successfully, I'd be curious where you're drawing your inspiration from.
Well, where we're drawing our inspiration from is, again, what we witnessed as children and saw our communities themselves work as this collective, work as a herd to be able to all share in the success that everyone was achieving through knowledge sharing, through actual capital, giving people. I remember when I was young and my parents were buying a property, the day that we were closing, I was with them for some reason, and we were at the bank, and they were short $100,000 because of those final transaction moments and what they needed to pay. And they called one of my cousins, who was able to become a pharmacist, and asked him for $100,000 on a temporary basis so they could complete the closing. No question asked, he wired the money, no interest taken. And then they returned the money. And that's one small example. I mean, that happened time and time over again. So it's that demonstration of we've seen it work. We've seen it work where groups that act as a community share resources, whether it's actual capital, knowledge. It works. Everyone benefits. And so that's where the real inspiration comes from, because your question is a good one. We haven't seen this in real estate development. Some of the people who we have conversations with, who were telling what we're working on, our peers, our own peers of the Indian community, who are the same generation as us, they don't even understand why we're taking this approach. Because I think people are making their bets now as we've kind of gotten to the second generation. And some are making their bets in a direction that maybe they have assimilated towards. And some are making their bets towards what has always been part and parcel of the culture, of our culture. And so that's where our real inspiration comes from. Moving forward, we continue to see our role. So we want to change up our what is typically seen as a hotel team staff. No longer do you really need front desk staff to check in and check out, as I said. But you need more ambassadors. You need community, engagement. Team members, people who can develop programming that makes sense for the community. What can this physical building, what role can it play for members of the community is the question we want to ask. And then how can we hire staff to continue supporting that? And again, to us, it makes business sense because people who are traveling now want to feel rooted. They want to feel connected. And they will pay dollars to stay in a place that is having this type of connection in the ecosystem of a city.
I'll have the last question. My question would be, how do you help community in getting involved to invest and financially be more stable? Not just with jobs and developing programs. I also know that I'm hearing that it's stayed in the family, right?
Correct.
This business has stayed in the family and has kept communities away. Mm-hmm. Now, I live in a neighborhood that is under-resourced, and I've noticed that the family has developed I don't know how many hotels in my community, and I don't know who would be staying there because my community is under-resourced, and now they're turning them into shelters. So how do we support community in a way that they're more financially stable and maybe invest in developing their own in a co-op?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and we haven't been able to fully answer it, but we've started to answer it, or started to take action towards that. And we have recently, as a company, began opening up ownership to members of our team. So that recently happened. It's not here in Charlotte, but in another community where we have our hotels. So that's one way that we feel like we can open up and also go beyond the family, which has been what has been role modeled to us. How can we continue to expand our family, so to speak? Another tool that we have is that because we own the real estate, we can think about how we design the requirements for a tenant to come into the commercial space. So we don't have to charge the same dollars per square footage as the rest of the market is charging. So this creates opportunity for members of the community who are interested in entrepreneurship to seek out space. Again, it's not a lot, but it's a start. To set up businesses at a lease that may not otherwise be possible, at a lease rate that might not otherwise be possible. So those are just a couple of small steps, but a lot more digging and understanding that we need to do of how we could even double down and triple down in that area.
I want to first just applaud these efforts. We had your business partner in our group yesterday, and like a plant, I think, in our group. But we prioritized in our group community reinvestment based on a very simple theory that the people who live in a community should benefit from the development. And we're tired of seeing the money from developments, TIF financing, all that go right back into those very development spots and not the people who live in a community. So we were trying to figure out ways to carry out that idea. And I think this is a shining example of actually doing that. Whether we want to call it gentrification or development, in my mind, it just sounds a lot like colonization to me, where we're coming in and taking over people's neighborhoods and we're pushing them out of them and we're running them the way we want to. And I just appreciate the fact that you're respecting and engaging the neighborhood. My question I've been leading up to is, you're doing this because of a deep history and having been othered and seeing what your family heritage has been and trying to carry some of that forward. If you could change like the city's development policy, for instance, what are some things that you would change that would encourage more folks like yourself to do these types of things? Like what's the policy agenda here that could help scale this beyond, a very influential group that you do a lot of hotel work, obviously, but how do we scale this and what policies would help us do that?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just kind of like back to some of the stuff we were talking about on the table yesterday. I think it's taxes, tax code, incentives, things like that. Like I would much rather pay taxes and pay fees and whatever it is, that like why is our property taxes why are our school districts funded by property taxes, right? That I would say that's a policy change that would make sense to change, because then you have inequality that's kind of baked into the system of how it's funded. And then, like from an economic standpoint, you've got opportunity zones. So now, who says a certain area is an opportunity zone, and why do the people that are selling real estate that they've made a lot of money on get to defer their capital gains taxes? Because they reinvest in this so-called opportunity zone. So I would say probably taking away some of that stuff. And those are benefits to us as developers. But I guess a policy change would be that maybe because those things, if everybody wants to talk about the free market, then the free market will take care of itself, right? And then we shouldn't need an incentive to build a hotel. And if we're going to build a hotel because the neighborhood is so cool, then we should pay what it costs to build the hotel and not have to rely on the government or the local municipality to give us an incentive, or there should be some policy that, if there isn't, maybe it's not an incentive, but maybe it's just a straight tax where if you're going to invest, then you also have to invest in some other, funding that is a vehicle to do more of that investment. We can't say beyond the walls of our project what is the right application of funds or what that investment needs to look like. But as a member of the community, we feel like from a policy standpoint, we should, one, not expect to have incentives to do something that's already going to make money, and then two, to pay into something that is through some kind of tax reform that has some direct investment that is owned by the community and controlled by the community that it's supposedly meant to serve.
One last one, if there is one, and then we'll.
Hold on one second, Gary. Hold on,
Hold on.
Hold on, let's get you on microphone.
Please. No,
Yes, we do.
yes, you do.
You mentioned something about property taxes, and I guess it was kind of disparaging. We have property taxes because it's a responsibility of every citizen in a community to pay for a public school education because every citizen benefits
Just a
from the public
clarification.
schools.
Just a clarification. What I was saying was that why should the funding of a school district be tied to the property taxes of that district? Because what's that? The property values is what I meant. Yes. So property values of a district. Yeah. So that's what I meant to say. Yeah. So that there's a disparity in school district funding depending on the property values in that district, because the funding for schools comes from property taxes, and property taxes are tied to property values. And so that I was suggesting that is probably problematic.
That is problematic.
Yeah.
I apologize.
I love this group. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.